You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Greetings, everyone. You're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe, and today we're going to ponder an interesting question. If you're in a role as a leader, whether you're working for a larger corporation or you've started a business and you're slowly building a team, do you have to be perfect to be a leader and be effective, or can imperfection work in your favor? So it's an interesting question, I think. And we're going to get into that a little bit. My guest, talk about imperfect. My guest is a gentleman named Don Colliver. And Don, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
As is a bit of a tradition here, tell us first about your background, Don, and the journey you've taken to get to where you are right now. And I know we'll cram a lot in a short time, but see what you can do with that question.
I'll make it quick, as quick as I can. So, I started as a video training producer for automotive back in Detroit, helping to train salespeople. I moved to LA, started directing and producing nonfiction television, like HGTV, that sort of thing. And then I kind of took a turn. I started doing comedy and performance. But it was all kind of the same through line of I was passionate about communication and engaging with an audience. I was just, how could I do it better? I landed in it as a blue man. I was a performer as a clown for a Cirque du Soleil partner called Spiegel World. And then I started presenting for tech companies at trade shows, cybersecurity specifically. Trying to utilize this skill of engagement with audiences, and I landed at Google. Now I teach technical speaking and how to deliver compelling technical talks and engage with groups at internally at Google and at other tech companies.
Quite a journey there, and I'm reminded of when we did our kind of run up our prep call. We were talking about the Blue Man Group experience and some of the things and the daunting training that those guys go through. I don't want to get too far off topic, but you share with the audience a little bit about that. I think people probably find that interesting.
Sure. Yes. Well, I trained with a Cirque clown by the name of John Gilkey. I started doing that in Los Angeles and had an aptitude for it. And it was one of those things, I loved it. And I don't recommend anyone who wants to make a lot of money to go into clowning, but I was following the love and auditioned for Blue Man. Was invited to train with Blue Man. But the thing about Blue Man is you need to be a really good drummer. And I am not a drummer. So they put you in what's called drum school. So I was training in drum school for a year at the same time I was on tour as the host clown for this other show. So nightly I'd be in front of 800 people engaging and moving the show along and having to improvise. And then during the day, I'd be like sitting in my hotel room with my little drum pad, like trying to get quicker. And yes, and then I had to learn how to throw marshmallows into people's mouths from 40 feet away, which was a trick in itself. But it was quite a daunting training process.
Yeah. Well, their show is right on the brink of athletic comedy, or what do they call it? It's another word.
Physical comedy.
Physical comedy, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a good bit of that in their shows, but
it's wonderfully universal. And it's the show is very strategically designed to cross cultures. Physical comedy transcends a lot of cultural boundaries. It's great.
Well, I've told my wife that in my later years, it dawned on me that would have been a great pickup line when I was single, and tell people I was a member of the Blue Man Group. And that, I don't know why I never thought about that because how do you know? How do you
That's a good point. But I can tell you, Doug, it's not a good pickup line.
Yeah,
It's not a good pickup.
it's probably not.
Yeah.
It'd be a very special woman that would resonate with that. But anyway, I digress. So the point is now a lot of your focus is helping leaders with their connection, whether it's to larger audiences or teams of people. So let's lean into that a little further. What do you consider connection?
Well, it's interesting because I have to start with clown. There was a moment in one of my early classes that it really clicked for me, and there's a exercise called Save the Show, and it's terrifying. So what needs to happen is the student is put on stage behind a curtain. The class is in the audience with the teachers in the audience, and you are required to enter the stage and make people laugh with no pre-thought preparation, like no script, no stand-up act, nothing. And the audience has been instructed, the class has been instructed to give you no pity laughter. You can only laugh if it's really funny, because it's easy in a class to be like, he's trying really hard, let's just throw him some laughs. But you're not supposed to do that. So what happens is, or for me, I jumped in, trying all my tricks, like running around, hitting the wall, like falling down, doing like fart noises with my armpit, like anything, just silence, silence. And I'm sweating. And I was failing, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to acknowledge what was going on between me and the audience. But I finally just like stopped. I felt what was going on in my body. I looked at the audience and I honestly said, like, well, what do you guys want? And that was the moment, like everything broke open. They laughed, I laughed, and I kind of had them at that moment because I stopped trying to push what I wanted and acknowledge what was going on in the moment. And once I saw that power, that's kind of what drove all my other curriculums moving forward of like, can you connect into that, what's going on between you and your audience or you and your team? Can you be comfortable with that? Can you acknowledge that? Because there's so much power in that.
Oh, very interesting. Boy, that would be and when you have a staged tough crowd to try to break through. So how do you translate that for corporate leaders and managers at a place like Google? How do you make that real for them?
Well, in classes, I think it all starts with low stakes practice, setting up situations where people can be in a supportive environment, try new things, fail, get feedback, and be comfortable in doing that. I think it can be challenging, especially in like really high powered environments like Google, where people just are just like, just give me the hard feedback. Just give me the tough stuff. I can take it. And what I've found is that starts to build up this residue of invulnerability. And what I'm seeing is more a robot, an amalgam of all these pieces of feedback they've gotten. And I'm not seeing the real person under there. Whereas if I can get people sharing from a true place first, build them up there, I find a lot of the issues and feedback just kinds of starts to fall away on their own. I'm speaking immediately about like public speaking challenges, filler words, pacing, bad hand gestures, stuff like that. I find often simply in a supportive environment, some of the bad habits start to drop away without them having to go in and surgically remove it.
Now, Google was the one that performed that famous, or now, in my mind, now famous study, Project Aristotle, where they brought out the revelation that psychological safety was one of the biggest contributors to high-performing teams. And I thought the premise of the study was dynamite. they admitting to themselves, we hire the best of the best, yet not all our teams work the same and accomplish the same great things. So how in the world can that be possible? So they embarked on that 2-year study, and it's hard to believe that publication of that study is now 5 years old. So came out in 2018, as I recall. Do you have any insights to what they as a company are trying to do to leverage the knowledge of that and turn it into reality across the board?
Well, I cite that study often in my classes, and it's just it's just kind of what I said about us building a supportive environment where bringing forward imperfect ideas in kind of the fail quickly model they showed it's the best way to have an innovative team. If you define innovation as coming up with the most ideas and the most successful ideas.
Yeah. I always wondered, that was the one thing, call it a data point, that was missing in that study is what was their definition of a high performing team? Was it achieving financial goals or innovation goals or creative thinking? And I don't know. It wasn't clear. I mean, you get the context of it, and
that was through IDEO, right? I think IDEO partnered with them or something.
I don't recall. Yeah. I don't recall how they did that, but that whole notion of the psychological safety, which, as my show title suggests, I'm a common sense kind of guy. When you read through all the jargon, we're really talking about just a fundamental element of trust. Can I, if I'm an employee, can I trust the environment I'm in? Can I trust my boss? Can I trust my teammates? And trusting them to not condemn me for a silly idea. Let me just speak my mind and share what I've got. And if it doesn't survive the light of day, then great, no problem, no foul, but at least it's out there.
Yeah, I wrote a book and kind of bringing this concept to public speaking. And the biggest hurdle I needed to surmount when I was writing the book was exactly what we're talking about. How do you develop that within yourself? And the only thing I could come up with is, how can I develop a feeling inside that I am enough, even if my ideas are shot down, even if my ideas don't make the light of day? And that's kind of unfair to hook that on a team manager. If someone brings forward an idea and everybody hashes it out, it doesn't go forward. If that person falls apart, is it the team manager's job to be like, "Oh, you're all right. You good job." Where's the responsibility fall on that? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, my quick answer to your question is, yeah, I think the team manager has a little bit of responsibility to sort of reset everything, because if that employee has taken a big defeat, maybe they really felt vested in the idea, but the team process ended up vetting it and shooting it down. I think that it's well advised for the team leader to have a one-on-one with that person and say, I realize how passionate you were about that idea, and it was great. You brought it forward. You see the outcome, and I think we all collectively agree that we need to go in a different direction. But thank you for your input. And when are you going to have a new one? When are you going to have the next one? I'm every time I talk about this, I'm reminded of an experience I had with a large global brand, and I was doing some team development work, and we did a team survey about where everybody ranked themselves and what their impression of the performance of the team was. And one part of the survey was this classic sort of 4-blocker diagram assessment. And everybody's responses were up in the upper right-hand quadrant, which is where kind of the optimized, scores are. But there was one guy way out in, I don't remember which box he was in, but it was clearly an outlier. By big degrees. And we got to the team meeting where we were going to assess this stuff, and everybody had already seen the report. And the manager had talked to me offline and said, I'm really worried that I've got this one outlier. I think I know who it is, but I'm not sure. And what do I need to do to identify him? Because I want to try to be proactive and pull them back into the fray. Well, we got into the team meeting. Long story short, and right away, one guy raises his hand and goes, I know everybody's wondering who the outlier is. That's me. That has to be me. And he started saying, he said, this survey has just reinforced. He says, I really do feel like an outlier on a regular basis on this team. My ideas always show up contrarian. I seldom get anybody to agree or embrace what I'm thinking. And, maybe for the good of the team, I need to go find another job. I need to, move out of here, move on, and let you guys have your way. And without any exception, everybody else on the team said, absolutely not.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
We're sorry it turns out that way, that's the outcome, and it makes you feel that way. But, now's the time to tell you, we need your contrarian thinking in our process here. It has huge value to what we're doing. And don't even think about moving on, at least not for this. I mean, if you've got another reason you want to move on, that's okay, but not for this. Don't move on now. So it was a real kumbaya, kind of healing moment there.
Wow, that's amazing.
So how do you see managers embracing this idea of you don't have to be perfect? I mean, how far do you take that?
Well, I can come at it from a clown perspective, if you will, because here's how a clown engages in the classic way, and I think it's instructive for what we're talking about. In a typical clown bit, a clown enters a stage, is aware of the audience, it wants to be there. The clown is entered to give something to the audience, something they've worked on, a bit, if you will. A performance. Clown begins the performance, very excited, very proud. Something goes wrong. There's a moment of failure. But the difference with the clown is the clown shares, like, with the audience, their feeling. Oh, I failed. I'm vulnerable. Then, kind of through that moment, the audience relates to the clown, because the clown then says, I can do it. I got this. Tries again, gets optimism, fails even crazier, right? This pattern keeps on happening until the clown bumbles backwards into some sublime success inadvertently, and usually that's the end of the act. But if you look at the engine of that, the way that it's building tension, the way that it's building engagement with the audience is through the imperfection. It's not through the successes. The imperfection is what's making the audience connect. And there's some research, there's the Blender, what is it? Richard Wiseman did like a social pop psychology kind of a thing, where he had two presenters doing demonstrations of blenders in a mall. And one, they were equally competent. One, every time they would attach the top to the blender, demo it, it would come apart and blend all over the place. And he showed that the person who was imperfect sold more blenders at the end of the day. This is like total pop psychology. I found another study, though, in 1966 by this guy, Elliot Aronson. He defined something he called the pratfall effect. This is kind of complex, but he had two groups of presenters, one group of very competent presenters, one group of not so competent presenters. And within each group, half of them would have some kind of a hiccup during their presentation. They'd spill their coffee. So half of the competent presenters would spill, half wouldn't. Half of the incompetent presenters would spill, half wouldn't. what they found was within the competent presenters, the ones who had the hiccup, the ones who spilled, were rated as more friendly, more nice, more warm than the ones who were perfect. That's the competent presenters. However, the incompetent presenters, the ones who were not looking at the audience, they weren't hadn't practiced their speech or whatever. The ones who spilled their coffee, audience just hated them. So basically the takeaway is, if you are prepared, if you are competent, imperfection actually adds that little bit of the hard to define characteristic of warmth. It can make you more relatable, but you need to be competent first.
Very interesting. And I've told this story before on the broadcast here. I had a mentor as I was going into the military. He was a senior officer nearing retirement. He told me, he said, "Thorpe," he said, "I'll give you a word of advice. You're getting ready to get commissioned a second lieutenant. Nobody cares. Nobody expects anything out of second lieutenants. You can mess up, and nobody cares." He said, as you get to be first lieutenant, the expectation will kick in. You'll need to be doing something. He said, but here's my advice to you. He said, work real hard those first 4 years, and about the time you're eligible to make it to captain, he said, you need to screw something up really bad. And he said, not to where you cause any permanent damage or cause any lives or anything, but just screw it up, and they'll investigate it, they'll look, and then they'll say, and they'll look at your whole body of work and go, oh, this guy's a pretty good officer. We need to put him on the short list. And I laughed when he got to the punchline. I said, well, sir, thank you for this advice, but no disrespect. I don't think I'm going to do that.
Strategic screw-ups, it sounds like.
Strategic screw-up strategy. And, challenges were enough. You didn't have to plan a screw-up. There was going to be one. So it played out. But get back to that imperfection thing. I think that really so many people in elevated positions of leadership, they're worried about looking like they've got a shortcoming or they've got a shortfall. And so much so in the coaching world, we talk a lot, clients bring to us the so-called imposter syndrome. I don't think I belong here. I don't feel like I belong here. And you dovetail that with a training that says, well, if you're going to speak in front of the large group, it's okay to be a little imperfect, and here's how you do it well. And now that I say that, that sounds a little odd. You learn how to be imperfect and do that well. Am I hearing that right, Don?
I like to say, because sometimes folks will ask, I want to be funny. Like, can I tell jokes? And I'm like, don't try to write a joke. But you can if you want, but it's usually there's easier ways to engage with humor. But one of which is to make fun of yourself or take yourself lightly. If PowerPoint goes awry, if you spill your water on stage. I think taking yourself lightly and being able to laugh at yourself, joke at yourself, is the best way to engage on that level of humor or lightness with an audience. But I like to say, take yourself lightly, take your message absolutely seriously, and your competency in your message absolutely seriously. When I'm coaching sales engineers to speak at trade shows, a lot of times they're pretty nervous. Like, who knows what you're going to have and deal with. But and I think it's fine to acknowledge that. It's fine to be nervous. It's fine to make fun of yourself and what you're dealing with, but never make fun of your skill level. Never make fun of your messaging, because that's the thing that you've worked your whole life for. We're not here to see, Barack Obama like killing it, like presenting. We're just here to hear the message, the thing that you have that nobody else has. And if you remember, I'm just a conduit. I'm just a pipe of information. I'm here to be of service to these people. And my whole job is to get myself out of the way as much as possible. It also helps with nervousness, anxiety, because it's not on me. It's not on Don. It's on all this messaging that I have.
Yeah. It is. I haven't seen data lately, but once upon a time there were studies that said, on the top 10 things executives and management professionals are afraid of, public speaking is, if not the top of the list, it's right up there.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that hasn't changed a whole lot. I think the average human being is petrified at the idea of standing up in front of a group and speaking. How do you help people get past that?
Well, like I said before, low stakes practice is hugely helpful. You're probably, I feel like emotional intelligence was big like 5 years ago, kind of a buzzy thing. But I think one thing I took away from that was heightened self-awareness. There's a lot of social awareness and understanding where people are at in emotional intelligence. Is Doug understanding me? Does Doug like me right now? That kind of stuff, worrying about what the other people are thinking. What I find lacking is self-awareness, specifically interoception, awareness of my physicality. And a lot of people, if they're dealing with anxiety and dealing with stage fright or dealing with that kind of stuff, they'll be in the middle of a presentation and not even realize that their body is going nuts. Their shoulders are, and we can all see it from the audience. Their shoulders are raising, their breathing's intense. They can't make it through a sentence without taking a gasp. And what I love about the personal aspect of emotional intelligence is you start to train to recognize those things, and you can self-regulate, and you don't have to put that onus on the audience. One thing we learn in clown is if you're coming in there onto stage to have the audience make you feel better, you have failed before you even stepped on stage. That is not their job, and it gets icky. We can feel it. And if you're looking for validation when you're speaking, if you're looking for validation from your team, that's not how it's got to work. You need to build that within yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. There are so many things I've heard over the years that people have tried to offer up as encouragements and tidbits, and some of them are great and some of them not so much. And where do you think the best public speakers, what area of their trade have they been able to perfect that gets them up to that kind of cream of the crop status?
Well, the people I want to hear the most can't wait to tell me about something. They don't even think, maybe their hair's a mess. Maybe their tie's all askew. They can't wait to just tell me this information. That's the person I want to listen to. All the polish that comes with time and maybe handlers or something like that. But the person who feels like they just would rather step out of the way and just get this information to me, they're so excited about it. Those are the people that I think are incredible public speakers. And those are the people I try and help, because there's a lot of, understandably, non-native speakers, they're very concerned about grammar and being understood. Of course, it makes perfect sense. But I think once we get over some hurdles like pacing, that sort of thing, it's important to just be okay and know that your passion is going to surmount all those issues you think that are happening in your listener's mind.
Yeah. As you were saying that, one guy that came to my mind that I've listened to, and I love to just listen to him speak, is John Maxwell, and he is he's good on tape and video, but if you ever get a chance to go to one of his conferences, it's almost indescribable how magical his keynote can be. He takes you to another place, and you're just sitting there going, how did we get here? What, how did this happen? What in the world? Now, his comeuppance in the public speaking realm, he was a preacher for a long time, so he learned, like only those guys can, how to work a crowd. And I mean that in a respectful way, no disrespect, but there's a lot to be said for being the guy that has to speak to an audience every week and have them feel like they got something out of it.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot more to it in the way of not just presentation, but the content that you are bringing, the message that you are bringing, to your point.
Sure. I mean, there's techniques, there's rhetorical techniques, there's storytelling techniques, there's things that are helpful. I balk at going too far into kind of the revival style and highly emotional language. First of all, because that doesn't resonate with technical speakers that I'm dealing with, and frankly, if they talk that way to their audience, the audience will be like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, why are you talking like that? But there are takeaways. There are things that you can utilize as long as it's not manipulative, as long as both you and the audience know what's going on. I kind of draw the line at any kind of NLP influence type usage of some of those rhetorical techniques.
Speaking of that, there are definitely a lot of coaches that are out there trying to help leaders develop better leadership influence by looking at things like NLP and certain other aspects of brain science, and digging real deep into personality assessment and all those kinds of things. And part of me says, if you're putting that on a poor guy that just needs to get up and give a team speech, that's a heavy load.
Yeah. I steer away from that. My whole game plan, my whole ball game in clown was the more authentic I can be without putting the need for validation on the audience, the better it's going to be. And there's no element of manipulation in that equation.
Yeah. That's real interesting. I'm sitting here thinking about, just again, I go back to my other question on the short list of things that leaders often fear, that public speaking becomes part of it. And I know, well, I'll say it this way, every CEO that I have ever known somewhat personally, their companies have all afforded them the chance to go to some kind of speaking school, and so they do get trained officially to be better public speakers, because, whether it's, if you're a publicly traded company, you're going to have to sit on an earnings call, and there's probably nothing more daunting than trying to deliver that message to Wall Street. But what do you think, if you're starting with one of these leaders for the first time, where do you take them on this journey? How do you get them started on that journey?
Great question. I just kind of check their pulse. I try and find some video of them, like in front of a live audience. I find that jumping on a Zoom call and having somebody like practice a speech just with me on the other side doesn't always really translate to really what their challenges are. And then we just start looking at presence. Like, how can we get present to the moment of what's happening and pull their attention off the content for a second. Trust that the content will be rehearsed. The content will be ready to go. Trust in that. Can we focus on what's happening in the moment, the present? That's presence, executive presence. And when I see people who own a room, they are absolutely conscious of what's happening in that room, but they also are absolutely confident in their message. So you can't not rehearse, you can't not practice, but once that is done, learning how to be in the present, be with what's happening, that's what we start to work with.
You know, you raised a good topic. There's a lot of times I'll have coaching clients, and the thing they want to talk about is this notion of executive presence. They're maybe climbing the ladder, and somehow in a recent review, they've been told they need to work on their, quote executive presence. And if there's ever been something that's a little more amorphic in nature than executive presence, I don't know what else it would be. I've often, not to be facetious, but I've often said executive presence falls in the same bucket as pornography, as the famous Supreme Court judge said. Can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
Exactly.
Same kind of idea. So any thoughts on what you tell people if they ask you about that? How do I show up with more executive presence?
Well, I love this. I love what you said about I know it when I see it. But I think the esoteric high level thing we talk about in my class is developing perspective. When I see someone who embodies executive presence, it comes from the ability to understand where everyone's coming from in the room, to be able to compassionately be in everyone's shoes, and yet also at the same time be completely confident in the direction that the company is going or the message that I'm delivering. But at the same time, not steamrolling and over everyone else's, being able to hold space for all those things. That's the high level. Easy to say, how do you do it? But when it comes down to brass tacks, I think people just want things to do now. Slow down, take pauses, learn eye contact, be conscious of your breathing. These are things that non-verbally exhibit executive presence as you're working on the experience that's going to bring you that perspective.
I use that same kind of recommendation when people ask me about it, especially for the non-native language speakers. There's something inevitable that when someone's in a tense moment, their vocal pitch goes up, their pace accelerates. It's almost a nervous staccato of speaking, and I've encouraged people to understand that that's an automatic tell. The audience knows you're nervous. Stop. You gotta take your pitch back down, take your cadence back down just a notch or two, especially for the non-native English speakers, because your dialect may be getting in the way when you get that pace running fast. It may be very hard for the audience ears to embrace what you're saying. As much as they may want to hear what you're saying, they're struggling with it because of your pacing. So if you slow it down and make it more deliberate, you end up exuding a lot more of that command and confidence of the moment.
I mean, the great thing is, it sounds like we're talking about Q&A or dealing with antagonistic audiences or something like that. And luckily, there are frameworks. There's a framework I teach about how, like a step-by-step, you get a question. What's the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? And there's just some kinds of things that can be installed through low stakes practice. Practicing in a class situation can help you seem more confident in those situations. And then from actual mental way of coming at it, you're probably familiar with the Minto's pyramid principle from McKinsey Consulting. That's where you start with the summarizing topic and then only get into the detail that is necessary. What I find oftentimes with technical folks is if they're thrown a question, they will answer with all the data first, landing at the conclusion, whereas the executive, all they want is give me the conclusion and then follow up with the data. And I get it because I want to justify my job. I want to justify all the work I did. But what your audience wants to hear is just give me the answer and I'll tell you when to stop in terms of the level of detail, rather than leading with all the detail and taking me through your process. Yeah.
Right. Well, and part of that, even if you are prone to do that sort of detail first, I get back to the idea of emotional intelligence, having the awareness to read the room. And if they've started to glaze over, that's your cue, dude, pull it back,
Yeah. Put a period on this.
As was famously said in a sitcom one time, pull up, Rose, pull up. When you're flooding everybody with that detail, it's the old classic. If the boss asks you what time it is, don't tell him how to make the watch.
Exactly. But it's understandable. It's for these technical folks I deal with at Google, that's their day-to-day is going in the weeds. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and along that line, that brings to mind the middle manager, the guy that's, not at the executive level, but has climbed up a couple of rungs and is kind of stuck in that no man's land between the frontline engineers and delivery people versus the very senior management. So that's where the ability to read the room is so vital, because if you're sitting in front of a bunch of technical people, you may want to be able and be prepared to get into the weeds and have those discussions. But if you're, the next meeting after that, if you're with a bunch of senior people, to your point, they just want those answers first. And if they need more detail, they'll ask you for it.
I find a great exercise that might be helpful for your audience would be, if you're coming into a presentation or some kind of a meeting where you have an idea of some questions you're going to get, having a partner ask you those questions, time it the first answer, have you do it again, say the answer is 2 minutes, have you do it again in 1 minute, have you do it again in 30 seconds, have you do it again in 15 seconds. And it will make you start to find the important parts. I find that to be a really helpful exercise and kind of mind-blowing for people.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, again, if you're coming from that reference point of normally operating in the details, deep in the weeds, so to speak, is a regular outcome for you.
They usually get to the end oh my God, I didn't even realize that's what I was saying. I don't know why I was saying all that other stuff at the beginning. Yeah.
Right. Well, and it reminds me of an acronym that we use in coaching. It's the word WAST, WAIST, as in Beltline, and it stands for Why Am I Still Talking? And young aspiring coaches, usually inevitably they'll see a moment and then they'll take off with, the coaching or consulting type advice for the client. And it's it's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be asking the questions and nothing more. So
I certainly fall into that category often. It's waste. Why are you still talking?
Well, Don, speaking of, we're about up on time, so I really appreciate you coming in and joining us here. Tell everybody the best way to get a hold of you if they're looking for more information.
Sure. Yeah. If you are interested in beefing up your technical talks, winktechtalks.com. I also have a free exercise if you want to work on what we were talking about, being able to split your attention from your content as well as the team that you're speaking to. Just go to doncolliver.com/engage and you can grab that PDF.
Great. Well, folks, as always, we'll have that information in the show notes, those links and those connect points. So drop down and check those out. So, Don, one last time, thank you for sitting in with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Doug. This was a blast.
Well, and on that note, folks, we are going to sign off, say goodbye. I do want to remind everybody we got a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, subscribe or hit the bell and leave us a comment. Let us know any thoughts you've got, feedback you want to share. Would love to hear from you. For now, we are going to sign off, say goodbye, and wish you a great day. Take care.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.